Hi, I'm Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Gamekeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then, buddy, you are in the right place. Join the Gamekeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and, of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
We're live in 3, 2, 1.
All right, everybody, here we are once again, West Point, Mississippi, Mossy Oak brand Camo's home. We're in the Gamekeeper studio. We got a new little clock over there running.
You've completely accessorized.
So now we know when we've talked too long.
That may be distracting, looking over there at that time.
I'm not going to look at it because I get distracted enough.
Lanny, you were gone last week. We're glad to have you back.
Yeah, proud to be back. Proud to be back in the studio. Looking good in here. Excited about what we're going to talk about today. I do have to say, though, Hercules has got a little bit of different look than he's had before.
Well, I noticed that about a couple of weeks ago. That's a heck of a 2-year-old. My heart hurts that somebody would come in here and touch Hercules and move him.
I've just noticed.
It's a shame.
I've just noticed.
It's a shame.
What is that, a cowbell?
Shame.
That's like the coffee commercial where they secretly replace the coffee with Folgers crystals.
Well, you know, that deer should have never been killed to begin with. That deer in another couple of years would have been a
superstar, no question about it.
So apparently you noticed it. And just
right
never
off the
said
bat.
anything.
So I've got an alert on a tag on Hercules. So if somebody ever stole him, I could track him down. So I knew immediately when he moved.
So you know where he is now?
I know exactly where he is
good.
now.
We didn't think we'd get that value.
Well, you're the OG prankster, so we just decided to send one right back at you.
Especially with Sam doing it, because he's got his hands back there in cooking oil and grease and
touching
everything
on
else.
Hercules like that.
Yeah,
I know you. Yeah.
My feelings are hurt.
I bet you are.
Like I said, it's a shame that somebody did that. Is what it is. So.
I still don't know what the bell with the shame is.
Well, you didn't watch Game of Thrones, obviously.
No, I didn't.
You're the only person in the United States that didn't.
I didn't either.
So, Lane, I wanted to ask you, I had an encounter with a snapping turtle this past weekend, and he almost bit me.
Like an alligator snap.
Yeah. Their turtles, their necks are a lot
like the
longer
one that
than
when it bites you, he doesn't let go till it thunders.
That's what I was going to ask you about. How do you think that legend got started?
I don't know, but I heard it my whole life, and I tell you what, it encouraged me not to get bit by one.
Yeah,
certainly you can trace that back to Native American. I don't know.
Isn't there a video? I've seen a video online of a guy getting bit by one.
I tell you, they look like they've got powerful jaws.
Ooh, you know they do.
And but the whole time
and that little beak thing, you know.
Yeah, so I went to move him. He was kind of in the way, and
where were you? At the Ponderosa?
No, I was not at the Ponderosa. I was at another little
secret
place.
bass fishing hole.
I know exactly
and that
where
thing reached out. It looked like his head stuck out a foot and came back there around. And if I hadn't been so, I'm quick as a.
Oh yeah, real quick.
But he didn't. Well, anyway, that whole won't let go till the thunders was in my mind.
I caught one in a conibear one time when we were beaver trapping, and it is amazing how far they can reach with that neck. You think he's part snake.
That's what he looked like.
It's like
You missed the snake video last
I did
week.
miss the snake episode.
It was.
But you had some of the spookiest, scariest snake
Cuz left
people
here
in the world.
saying, I'm not going to sleep a wink tonight.
You had Vandy in here. He's scared of snakes.
He did.
You were terrified of
the whole
snakes.
time.
I think it was the perfect one for me to miss because I'm really the only one that's not scared of snakes.
It was bad.
It was bad.
It was. And watching the video of what was going on, they 18-foot Burmese pythons.
Well, I hate I missed it. But
everything's good. You're back here in time, so anyway, the boss isn't here today. I think he's out planting duck calls.
He is in hot pursuit of some greenheads, that's for sure. So I think they are spending some time on a little piece of property they got north of here, trying to get it finally shaped and ready for waterfowl.
I think he was saying he was getting ready for getting ready.
That's
for
exactly
duck
what he's
season.
doing.
Last night, Mark Jury, I hadn't even thought about this, but he said the weather is very conducive to EHD in the Midwest.
Is that high humidity, low humidity?
Well, this so dry it dries down, and it exposes places that these midge flies can hatch. I think is the way it was explained to
like
me.
the water's edge.
Yeah, dry weather is a big contributor, and they are really having a tough time. He said, guaranteed, we're going to have EHD this year, and that just kind of. I mean, if you're a guy and you're growing deer at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and then something like that happens, that's got to be
It's
tough.
devastating.
And
that's for sure.
they can't handle it as well as our southern deer can, at least not yet.
Boy, that'd be tough. I sure hope that doesn't happen out there for you guys that are in the Midwest. That's for sure. So,
Hey, have you tried the Uncle Ray's chips yet?
they're delicious.
They are delicious. I think we'll break a bag open.
Yeah, go ahead. Just Richie might want to turn his mic off over there if he's going to be doing it.
They're quite scrumptious, these are.
So we don't. Mac, are you awake over there? Are you texting again? What's going on?
I'm awake.
There's Mac. So we had talked about for our commercial talking about this new Furminator. Have you paid attention to it?
A little bit.
The small
We're trying
Yeah.
to sell some seed right now, so we're.
Kind of busy around here, Bobby.
Yeah, but I mean that thing would help somebody plant some seed.
Hey,
that's
I'm
for sure.
excited about it. That's a small unit. It's going to be great for getting in little tight nooks and cranny places. You don't have to have a giant piece of equipment to run it. You can run it, I think, with primarily UTV or ATV, either
Yeah,
one. So,
or a small tractor with
Yeah.
a 3-point hitch. You can hook it up to it. So it's so well made.
yeah, good stuff.
Big, heavy, beefy piece of equipment.
Yeah, it really is. And so I'm excited.
I think it's a perfect little size for the wildlife guy, for sure.
Yeah, that'll be good. So, guys, so what we're talking about is Furminator has an ATV-sized unit. So you can go to Furminator.com if that's. I think Mac could back me up if that's not the right website. I'm pretty sure it is. But Furminator.com and check out that small one.
Small unit.
They're also making just a cultipacker, and they've got some new stuff on the horizon, guys. I'd check them out.
Quality, it's good stuff, dependable stuff.
Yeah.
They've been around in the implement game longer than anybody, hadn't they?
Yeah,
I mean, we've
they-
seen some guys come and go,
They're steady.
but they're the ones.
They are.
That's
No
a
doubt about it.
testament.
That is a testament.
Yep, sure is. So today's show, we're going to be talking about my favorite fish, the shell cracker. And I love to fish for chinkapins. And
Bobby, you couldn't be more wrong. I know you're just being silly, but we are talking about Castanea ozarkensis.
Well, that's what I
the
thought we were
Ozark
talking
Chinquapin, not to be confused with the Chincopen oak. And our guest, AJ Hendershott, is going to tell us more about it. We're going to ask him a lot of questions. AJ works with the Missouri Department of Conservation, where he's an education regional supervisor. So he does all kinds of educational stuff. He's got a big biology background. So he's all around. He's a really good woodsman. But he's a board member of the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation. And we're going to let him get into that more. But as most of our listeners know, the American chestnut suffered from the blight, from a blight in the early 1900s, and functionally made the chestnuts extinct. But a lot of folks don't know there's a couple other species of Castanea that are native to the United States that were also affected. And so we're going to try to learn more and ask AJ questions and go from and just see where it goes.
yeah, well, why don't you introduce him?
So welcome, AJ.
Greetings.
All
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, glad to have you here.
No doubt.
Let's just start off with the broad story, maybe the history of the blight, and we can get off into how, the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation, and just go from there. So what you got to start with?
All right. Well, the Ozark Chinquapin is a lesser known cousin, as you said, of the American chestnut tree. And there is a blight that started in 1904 in the Bronx Zoo, and it just made a steady march all throughout the range of the American chestnut, the Allegheny Chinquapin, and the Ozark Chinquapin. Now, at the time that was happening, all Chinkopens were thought to be the same thing. Modern science in the last 20 or 30 years have determined they are not the same thing. There are some differences, which we can go into. But the bottom line is these things are born in a spiny shell, looks like a little porcupine egg, so to speak. And you're right, it's not a Chinquapin oak. An oak has an acorn cap, and these Chinquapins, they look like an acorn, but they're in a spiny burr. And the major difference is when you try to eat one. If you eat an oak, it's going to be bitter. If you eat a Chinquapin, it's going to be sweet, and you can eat as many as you can. You can founder yourself on these things. They're so good, and they're fantastic size for a variety of wildlife. They're good for people, and there's a lot of stories that I've heard over the years about people making use of the nuts, the leaves, the burrs, the wood. It's just a fantastic tree, and as fate would have it, because of this blight, most people have forgotten all about it. And I'm working with a lot of good-hearted folks all across the Ozarks and even on the eastern side of the Mississippi River, because the Ozark Chinquapin does live in some of the eastern states, and people are trying to restore it, bring it back on the landscape, and that's a pretty exciting story.
A very exciting story.
No doubt.
And I've just been fascinated with it. And like you said, it can be used for so many different things. I see people dyeing fabrics with it, and just doing all kinds of cool stuff. But yeah, old timers used to turn their hogs loose and let them eat the nuts and collect them themselves and go into town and trade them for things. And it's fascinating. And of course, I obsessed over it and tried to learn as much as I can. But I don't know near as much as you guys do with the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation. Can you tell us more about how the foundation was formed? It seems to me you guys are a little bit more grassroots than maybe the American Chinquapin Foundation. It seems like you also have a bit of a different plan of attack for bringing it back. So can you just tell us a little bit more about the OCF?
Yeah, glad to. We actually call it a tree roots movement because it has come up from the bottom. This is not something that was born from a government agency. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I work for a government agency. But it started with a fellow named Stephen Bost and Harold Adams. And they had a conversation in a hunting camp. And Harold was at the time in his 80s, and he mentioned this Ozark Chinquapin and how important it was. And Steve Bost, who was a park naturalist, a very good woodsman in his own right, he had no idea what Harold was talking about. Well, come to find out, these things do exist in some key locations. Now, the interesting thing about what Steve started to discover, when he found a patch of Chinquapins, he might find 100 to 150 of them. They were all stump sprouted, which means they have gotten the blight, they've died back, they sprout from the stump, they live for about 10 years, get the blight, die back, stump sprout, and the cycle continues on. Well, in a patch like that, he would find one tree that was 40, 50 feet tall, and it was doing fine. He would find that same situation 2, 3, 4 counties over, or in Arkansas, or another state of sorts. What he started to do was work with other people to identify the tree, look for these patches, and look for those really healthy trees. And we're gathering pollen, and we're crossing the trees, even though they might be 50 to 100 miles apart from each other. Well, over the years, we have gotten to the point where we mail seed out to anybody who's a member of the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation. And when we send seed out, we're not sending out the culls. We're not sending out low resistance seed. We're trying to make sure that people get really good genetics. And I want to talk about that in a moment, so don't let me forget about that. The great thing is you get these seed planted on your property, you're helping us solve a couple of problems. Number one is you have to find trees that have some way of fighting this blight. And number two, you really have to have these trees put back on the landscape and managed. And both of those are monumental issues to deal with. Now, we're starting to make progress on the first one. And as we get more and more members to the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation, and we get more government agencies working with us, we're starting to find that we have hope of getting these trees back on the landscape in a natural setting, doing what they're supposed to be doing the way they would have 150 years ago in the woods before they were affected by, some of the mass logging and some of these diseases. So the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation, we have membership dues, $30 a year. And what you get for that is some seed that we mail out every winter. The reason we do it in the winter instead of sending that out in the fall, we put those in a refrigerator with some peat moss, a little bit of moisture, and we keep them right up until about the time that you should probably begin thinking about putting them in the ground. that's when we mail them out. We watch the weather forecast. We're not going to mail these out when it's sub-freezing, and we're going to have the mailman put it in your mailbox, and then it's going to freeze on you out there and kill the seed. We don't want that. So we want to make sure those things go out at the appropriate time, and then you have the opportunity to pick a really good site. And what people should be looking for is a site that's very rocky, well-drained, lots of sun. In fact, if it's got a lot of pine on it, or the soil is just not the best in the world, as long as it's not clay, and what I mean by that is clay that's swelling and doesn't drain very well, it's a perfect place for Chinquapin otherwise.
Right.
So rocky, sandy soil that's just hot, dry, they love it. They say,
Upland.
give it to me.
Yeah, so if you're like me that has a farm that's got a lot of undulating terrain, you probably want to put it further up the hill.
Yes.
In an aspect where it gets a lot of sunlight.
Yeah.
But they don't like wet feet. You know, there's a lot of species like
It
that.
sounds like they like
Yeah.
acid soils too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
We're finding there might have been
Oda.
some down in the foothills, but they really do like it. The worse the soil, the better, it seems like.
Interesting. So quickly, can you describe the difference? Gosh, I've got like 5 questions in one. The difference between a true chestnut and a true Chincopen. And then can you describe
Okay.
the difference between Allegheny and Ozark?
I will do my best. When it comes to the chestnuts, they tend to have 3 seeds in a burr, whereas a Chincopen most of the time is going to have 1 seed per burr. That's a big difference. That's the same between Allegheny and Ozark Chinquapin. They tend to have 1 seed per burr. Now, your Allegheny Chinquapin is really going to struggle to get past 25 feet tall, whereas an Ozark Chinquapin in the past would reach heights of 80 feet. The American chestnut could get heights of sometimes 100, 120 feet tall. So certainly the Ozark Chinquapin is a large tree, but it doesn't do anything compared to the American chestnut by comparison. Also, the seeds that come out of there, they're round in the Chinquapins, but they're more flattened because you're putting 3 seeds into 1 burr. So that's a big difference. Now, the leaf shapes are very similar. The number of teeth vary a little bit. For example, the Ozark Chinquapin leaf is a little bit longer than what an Allegheny Chinquapin leaf is. And then there's more saw teeth on the Ozark Chinquapin than what you're going to find on the American chestnut.
Okay.
There's a lot of that stuff on the Chincopen Foundation's website. So anybody who has questions, jump on there. We have some look-alike diagrams. We have photographs. And if somebody has any question, photographs are great. Send us photographs. We'll do the best we can. And sometimes we ask for a little more information, another picture with a ruler or something for scale. But we love talking to people about this. The people that are out there that love this, they're the ones that really find the trees and give us some really good findings. I'm gonna turn my lights back on there.
Oh, wow.
Let me ask this. So
Okay.
before this blight that got started at the Bronx Zoo occurred, the woods from all over the
Completely different than what
all
they are
over
now.
the eastern half of the United States.
Even here, right.
So if you looked at an acre, so these chestnuts and Chinquapins and Allegheny, they comprised our hardwoods as much as the oak tree does or did.
From what I understand, that's the way it was, wasn't it, Dud?
Yeah, and from what I've read, the American chestnut can compete with things that oaks can't compete with. So they're getting as big as tulip poplars and things. Now the Ozarks are a little bit more harsh than the Appalachians, so I'm assuming the Ozark, it's a little bit poor site, so naturally it doesn't get as big. But they just figured out how to compete in the forest and work together. And then this blight came and
Completely changed the landscape.
How
AJ,
long-
correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe 40% of a lot of the hardwood forests had some form of Castanea.
Yeah, you certainly had a lot of the American chestnut comprising your forest in the eastern United States, especially along the Appalachians and the Blue Ridge Mountains. But the Ozark Chinquapin was more sporadic in that same area. We found them in Georgia, the Carolinas, Maryland. Mississippi has a good population, so does Alabama. We have them in Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And over on the western side of the Mississippi River, they're about as common, or they would have been, as say an ash tree. Pollen records are about the same. So if you think about how often you go through the woods and you see an ash tree, well, that's kind of how it would have been with the Chinquapin. I think it would be more like groupings, though. You would go to a particular ridge and you would see a particular rock outcropping, and the soil was just right, the sun was just right, and that's where you're going to find a whole grove full of chinkapins. And I get a lot of great stories from old timers talking about in the fall. That's where they would go squirrel hunt because the squirrels could not stay away from these trees, and it was a great place to harvest them.
So how long did it take this blight to go from the Bronx Zoo to most everywhere and impact these trees?
About 50 years. By the 1950s, it was in Missouri and Arkansas, and then later in the 50s, it was in Oklahoma and Texas. Yeah,
Completely
it
changed
was a
the
slow
landscape.
spread.
Yeah. Wow. So there's people in the Appalachians that all of a sudden trees started dying, and they probably had no idea what's going on.
No, they didn't. And it's rot-resistant wood. A lot of the fence posts you dig up are, could be chestnut or chinquapin. Toxie in Mr. Fox's cabin is made out of American chestnut, from not too far north and east of here.
That had to greatly impact wildlife when that started. It's just if there were that many chestnuts and that many chinkapins,
Completely changed the
yes.
landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we need to do what we can to bring them back, and that's what the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation is doing. It's a fascinating story. I was on the Tom Bigby National Forest last year, goofing around one Sunday afternoon, and I thought I came across one, and so I can't quite remember the email, but it's like info at Ozark, whatever. It's on their website, and I sent photos in, and Steve Bost himself looked at them, and he said that it wasn't, but I'm still going to look for more. It's fun to try to find stuff like that.
Yeah.
The best I can tell.
Sweet gum?
No, I'm trying to come up with the speed. It was some type of service berry, but it was on an upland site, growing out of rocky ground. So I'm still kind of rooting for. But the leaf edges were not. I'm not good at explaining the identifying features, but the leaf edges were somewhat rounded, and so that kind of said it's not a native Castanea.
So do you have to have multiples, like 4 or 5 of these together for them to be able to produce nuts?
Well,
That's a good question.
Yep.
They produce both flowers, but they don't self-pollinate very well. So if you have a group of trees together, you've got much better pollination.
So
when a guy joins, you guys, how many of these nuts do you send them?
Generally about 4 or 5, depending on the year. And see, this year we're a little concerned. This drought has been really hard on our trees. Some of the trees are beginning to drop the burrs already, just due to the extreme heat and the lack of rainfall. They're even changing colors in terms of leaves. So it's pretty obvious they're biologically shutting down for the summer, and then they'll bounce back in the spring. But that makes it tough for us sending seed out. But bottom line, we want to make sure that people have the best opportunity to raise trees and get pollination and get nuts of their own so that they can feed the wildlife, use on their own, or give it to other people.
So look, I'm going back out of here because this is Dudley's.
Keep asking.
But one other thing, so there could be somebody listening to this, and that's somewhere and realizes they have some of these trees and didn't even really know what they were, or might not have paid attention to them. That then could get in touch with AJ, and could be a seed source for you in the future.
Yeah, and that happens on a regular basis. One that happened this past winter, a lady asked me, "Is this a Chincopen?" And oftentimes my response is, well, no, it's a Chinese chestnut, or it's a Chinquapin oak or something like that. But this time I said, I think you've got the real deal. Would you mind if I send a forester that's affiliated with us out to visit with you? Is that okay? And she said, oh, yeah, absolutely. So Chris Wyatt with the Arkansas Fish and Game went out to visit with her, and he didn't just find one Chincopen. He found about a dozen, and some of them were pretty good size. And it was certainly worth managing. And interestingly enough, once you find some of these Chinkopens, it doesn't just end there and say, yay, you found a Chincopen. We've got some suggestions. Here's some things you could do. We're not here to take over or mandate what you have to do. It's here if you care about this tree. Obviously you do, or you wouldn't have contacted us. But here's some management techniques. So if you have trees that are crowding the Chinquapin, cut those. Make sure they fall away from the Chinquapin so it doesn't cause damage. Anytime you've got some branches that are damaged, sometimes just cutting that, trimming it up and allowing that tree to grow nice and healthy and limit the amount of wound space that could be available for blight to increase there. All those things make a big difference.
Are
When
you
you talk
checking?
about-
You checking email there, Landon?
No, that's not me. That's not me.
You've got mail.
Yeah, I don't. It's got to be mine.
You've got mail.
No, I was actually looking at the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation website, digging up in there and looking at some stuff. You mentioned that the tree, does it has to have an open wound to get the blight?
It does. There has to be some kind of damage. And as ridiculous as it sounds, a squirrel jumping off of a branch can scratch thin, young bark on the limb tips enough for one of those spores to get in there and get going. But obviously, if there's a storm, a limb gets broken off, or there's some damage for other reasons, that's a place, an entry location for that particular tree to get infected, and then the whole cycle begins.
And this is an airborne transferred blight. Is that the best
Yes.
way to put it? And is it everywhere anyways, or is the blight kind of restricted to specific locations?
It's pretty much in areas where you do have chestnut relatives, but it can also live. It doesn't kill, but it lives on sumacs. And, that's as common as anything. So just because you don't have a lot of Chinquapins or chestnuts in your area now and you plant some new ones, that doesn't mean that blight's not going to show up. It could be there from generations past.
That's interesting that it's housed on sumac. Like the cedar apple rust that affects apples is housed on cedars.
Yeah.
And I was talking about that with somebody else earlier today. Back when everything used to burn every year, just about all the cedars retreated. So now that there's cedars everywhere, it makes it a lot tougher on the native
apples.
crab apples. But it's funny how those plants kind of work together and against each other. Sumac and chestnut aren't even related.
Are these trees susceptible to like root rot? Are those kind of symptoms? Are they more susceptible?
That's another good question.
It is a good question.
There's a cinnamon root rot, and you might know more about that than I do, AJ.
There is one that affects the American chestnut called the ink root rot or ink root disease. And that, interestingly enough, is something the Ozark Chinquapin does not succumb to at all whatsoever. So that's a good thing. There's also a gall wasp that infects the American chestnut, and the Ozark Chinquapin does not succumb to that either. It's an interesting tree. It's pretty tough. If you're going to live in the Ozarks, you better be tough or get out, because it's not going to happen. It's sometimes an inhospitable place to be. But the Ozark Chinquapin does have a history of thriving there in the past. And what we're finding, some of those trees I've mentioned that we find and we cross-pollinate, we're doing some blight testing on them, and we're comparing them to an American chestnut that's pure, totally susceptible to the blight, and we compare it to Chinese chestnuts. And what we're finding is that some of our trees are just as susceptible as the American chestnut, but some of the crosses, those trees are as resistant as the Chinese chestnut, and in some cases, they are more resistant than the Chinese chestnut. And keep in mind, the Chinese chestnut has had this blight for millennia. It's grown up around it, so to speak. And now we have a tree that, because of some of the genetics we're getting crossed there, we're finding trees that they are definitely more resistant to the blight. So what that means is they're going to get it, but the chances of them dying is much lower than it was if we were just letting them go, as fate would have it. So it's pretty interesting to see the progress we've made in 15 years just by looking for those really mature trees surrounded by trees that are infested by the blight.
I'm hoping some of our listeners will
Yeah,
realize
right.
they got
No
some.
problem.
And it's such a simple process and easy to do. Just Darwinism at its finest. The strong survive. So, as far as taste goes, would you, if you were to have a handful of Chinese chestnuts and you were blindfolded, and I'm talking about humans and deer. A lot of us are deer hunters. We're turkey hunters. We like the wildlife to eat all this mass that falls out of trees. Which one is there a difference in flavor?
Yeah, there is. I greatly prefer Ozark Chinquapins, and it's not just because I'm biased. It's I really think they taste great. They do have a lot more. They've got a lot more starch in there, carbohydrates, so they're going to taste sweeter. But they're also higher in protein. If you look at on the website, we do have some comparisons on nutritional analysis within the group Castanea and also other native hardwood nuts here in the eastern United States. The Ozark Chinquapin is a heavy hitter. It doesn't necessarily beat every nut every time, but it does not have to hold its head in shame. It's very high in protein, carbohydrates. It's got a reasonable amount of fat, and it's got some fiber in it. So it is definitely a wildlife-friendly food. And the great thing is it's easy to crack. So squirrels, turkey, deer, anything that can eat a small post oak nut is going to love an Ozark Chinquapin because it is free of tannins. You can eat them without getting sick. And truthfully, it does change the flavor of the meat. I mean, here in the Ozarks, most of our deer eat a lot of acorns. And I marinate my deer meat for a day or two just to get some of that tannic acid flavor out of there. And then, and I love deer meat. Don't misunderstand. I love it. I just marinate it a little bit. But eating more and more Chinquapins does change that flavor. There's no tannic acid.
And they sent me a photo of a buck that was eaten in one of their seed orchards. And, it looked like it was something Terry Drury would shoot. I mean, it just this monster with drop times in the middle of the Ozarks, the upland site, tearing up these Chinquapins.
AJ, did I see a photo of you hunting with an atlatl?
Yes.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. What? So have you hunted with
There
it?
goes my trivia question.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I'll have to come up with another one.
Well, he'll get it right. He's good to go.
So are you really hunting with it?
Oh yeah, I love using and making atlatls. Truthfully, I probably spend more time making them than anything else, but I have been out in the woods and I've hunted with them. I have not taken a deer with one. I don't want to misrepresent, but I have taken a rabbit and a squirrel with one, and that's probably harder than anything else. And I'm going to attribute that to dumb luck as much as anything.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
really
it's
is.
so cool. And I
think
think
a
I
squirrel,
saw
that'd
you
be awesome.
holding a Osage self bow in a photo as well.
Yeah, I'll make a bow out of anything that's worthwhile here in North America. I've learned a lot from the Native Americans that have left their stuff behind, and I've learned from them. And Osage orange, hickory, ash, elm. I've made longbows out of a lot of stuff. Love it.
As Mr. Fox would say, you're a true conservationist.
There's
So,
no doubt about
Because
that.
it's so much harder to kill a deer with one of those things. So
Yeah,
it
much
makes
less
you a
an
true
atlatl.
conservationist.
Yeah. Are you napping your own arrowheads? And
I'm not napping. I've got a buddy who does that for me. I'm not real good at percussion flaking. Now I can pressure flake, but the percussion, I end up with stuff that isn't really what you want to put on the tip of an arrow. Let's just put it like that.
So what's the range with an atlatl? Do you think you could, all things right, you could kill a deer?
Oh, if it was 20, 25 yards and I'm practiced up, I've got a pretty good chance of hitting them in the boiler room.
Yeah.
Wow.
Would that arrow? I mean, that's a spear. I guess would be maybe the better word.
It is.
Would that go? Would there be an exit wound if you hit him in the lungs?
Oh, it depends on what you hit on the way through, but yes, it could go all the way through.
I mean,
We've
think
got a
about
lot
how
of mass
heavy.
buildup.
Think about how heavy that arrow spear is,
Yeah.
and the momentum. And for people that don't know, an atlatl is like a spear chucker. It's a stick with a hook on the end. You hold both the spear and the spear chucker, and it kind of hooks into the back of the spear.
Chunker.
And you're using it to fling the spear. So there's a lot
Leverage.
more leverage involved than just holding the spear with your hand. That's pretty much the premise.
That's a good way to describe it. And you can launch that spear at about anywhere from 55 to 60 miles per hour using an atlatl. It's incredible the amount of force that you can get. And by the way, that will go through a garage door. Don't ask me how I know that.
I remember a few years ago, Missouri legalized it. Some states you can kill a deer with whatever you want to. Some states you can't. But I think Missouri added that as archery, if I'm not mistaken.
They've expanded that now. You can use that for a lot of different types of hunting. It is a legal method for archery, certainly. It is for the alternative methods. And these days you can even hunt with archery or atlatl during the firearm season if you choose to do so. And that was something where another grassroots group, the Missouri Atlatl Association, did some demonstrations to show how accurate they were at hitting a target consistently, and said, we would like to be able to hunt like this. And then after it was legalized, it wasn't very long, and you had the first atlatl harvest in Missouri in a very long time. And it has since been replicated by not that individual, but more than just that person. So it is a legal method. People do pursue it. I'm not going to say it's going to take the state by storm, but it's another opportunity. And if you're really looking for a challenge, that's a great way to do it. It's kind of like throwing a baseball. You have to practice to get good at it. But once you're there, it's really something else to get your heart beating.
I'm betting Lanny would be good at it because he's got these long arms. And as big, as long as your arms are, you would have even more leverage, I would think.
Well, we're gonna make one.
But AJ, if you're up in a tree on a platform on a ladder stand, that's a lot of motion, isn't it? With that atlatl, more than with just a compound bow.
It is, but I don't get up in the tree stand with the atlatl. If I'm going to do that, I'm in a brush blind. I'll make something much like the natives would have done. I'm down on the ground. I'm hoping for that deer to walk past me in a quartering away. And then I'm hoping he looks the other direction because, I do have a lot of arm motion that goes with that. But the bottom line is you can bring home the bacon with a spear thrower, and it has been done in the ancient past, and it's been done in the modern past.
And they probably made some of those spear throwers out of Ozark Chinquapin.
Yeah.
Possibly.
There is some evidence of that, yes. There was a research project in Arkansas where they found some remnants in a rock shelter. And they think part of the reason that atlatl was preserved is not only because it was in a dry area, but because it was made of Ozark Chinquapin wood, which, as you mentioned, is rot resistant and would therefore resist the ravages of time.
This is so cool, and we're getting way off topic, but I'm totally happy with it.
So Lanny, I'm thinking this atlatl thing. If we could get AJ to come down, that he could walk up in some pigs. If he got the wind right, walk up in some pigs. 15 or 20
that
yards.
Would actually be a fun way to practice is on an invasive species.
Yeah.
You know.
Hey, AJ, are you up for it?
I missed what you said we were hunting. Now, what are we after?
We want to invite you down here to do some wild pigging with that spear chucker.
Atlatl, yeah.
Well, let's talk about that after the show.
But yeah, last thing, most people, they see what they think is an arrowhead, the bigger ones. That's actually a spear point that was on the end of a atlatl dart. The little bitty ones were on the end of an arrow.
And they're more bird points.
What people call bird points is actually
an arrowhead
on the end of an arrow. Yeah.
Okay.
The other one you'd call a
Well, I'm
spear
sorry.
point.
I'm sorry I got us off. But I when I saw that picture, I had to ask you about that. I'm sorry I messed up your.
No, that's
question.
fascinating. And one of my goals is that the nursery can begin producing the native castaneas and phase out the non-native castaneas.
Yes.
And
When we gonna start that, Dudley?
I don't know, but I want, a long time ago, the way I got to know you guys and Steve is I sent some tree tubes. I sent 50 tree tubes to the OCF for them to use in some of their plots. And I got a few seeds. Unfortunately, a tornado got my couple of Ozark Chinquapins I had at my farm. But I want to try. I want to try some more. We're going to join back up, and we encourage our listeners to do the same and help get this thing going.
You bet. And interestingly enough, I've got two trees that probably came not too far from where you all are broadcasting. They are Mississippi Ozark Chinquapin
My
trees.
understanding is there's one like maybe in Lafayette County near Oxford and Batesville. Lafayette.
Well, you say tomato, I say tomato.
Thank you, Mr.
So, yeah, I've got a
Know-it-all.
couple of those trees on my property, and I'm babying those. And then when they get to the point where they're actually flowering, which happens within 3 to 5 years of being planted, I'm going to try to make sure they pollinate each other. And then if I get some seeds that are specifically from Mississippi, I want to earmark those for restoration in that state.
That's great.
I'd love to have some.
I'm going to grow some.
Bobby, your farm would be a good site.
The
You've got
Ponderosa.
the upland. You've got some rocky areas probably and good upland stuff.
Would they
I'm
grow on the
gonna
river
join.
bottom?
They
Look,
probably wouldn't be the best spot on the river bottom.
They wouldn't.
But any
Dadgummit.
kind of
I'll put one at
acidic,
your
probably south or west facing slope up on a hill would be good.
This is just fast. When I imagine what the woods used to look like, it's just depressing to think.
It's amazing to think about it. And this wasn't that long ago either, I mean, it was less than 100 years ago.
And I'm assuming they're a fire adapted species.
They are. The only thing is you don't want them burned early on.
Sure.
The seedling's going to have to get a little bit of girth on them, get pretty good size, get the limbs up above some of that flame length. And then, they are very heat adapted. I've got some interesting photos from Oregon County, Missouri. There was a wildfire that went through there, and some of the oaks have flame marks that go up a good 2 to 3 feet on the trunk. The Ozark Chinquapin trunks, which were same size trees, they look like they're looking around saying, "What? Something happened? I don't get it."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they had no marks, no evidence of fire at all whatsoever.
Chincopen. I wonder what that word means. I tried to look it up. Do you know, AJ?
Oh, at one time I've looked that up. It's a word that came from some of the native tribes on the East Coast.
I
You
read
don't gonna think of it after I'm off of here.
Yeah, so I read where John Smith was reporting back that there was a nut that the local natives were just fascinated by that they called a Chinquapin, and it was just so important to their lives. And he wrote back how fascinating it was.
I bet my buddy Dr. Chuck Ma would know what that is, but he's not here. So.
But one of my favorite fish is a shellcracker, and it's called a Chincopen. Also, I just wondered.
And then when we sell Chincopen oak, and everything has a common name, and so in time it would either be spelled with a QU or a K, and now what I do is the oak Chincopen, I spell that with the K, and the Castanea Chincopen, chestnut Chincopen, I spell that with a QU. That's just my way of doing it.
Well, and I'm with you on that. That's the way I prefer to do it. But if somebody ever were to write to me, I'm not going to correct them as long as they're interested in saving the Chincopen. Spell it any way you like.
Absolutely not. So does anybody have any more?
Mac, you got one? What about Richie? Richie, you look like you got a question, but yeah, okay.
We have a Chincopen out here in the yard, don't we?
No, that is a dwarf Chincopen oak from Nebraska.
Oh, okay.
That's a totally different species.
Okay.
But it's an oak.
Well, you called it a Chincopen in my defense.
Yeah.
Dudley is so confusing.
That's Quercus prenoides, if I'm not mistaken.
AJ?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to plant some Chincopens.
Oh yeah.
Some Ozark Chincopens.
We all are.
I'm
Let's
glad
all
to hear it.
join. We need a couple bags of seed to get this thing going on.
So do you think there'll be nuts available this year, or are you worried about the?
Well, I'm worried about them, but you know what? I'm just a little bit this much like a farmer now. I worry about it all the time.
We know all about that.
Yeah. So, this year we had a pretty good spring in terms of it wasn't too rainy, wasn't too cold. And we had good blooming, and I feel like we had pretty good pollination, but boy, it turned off hot in June and got dry, and that really hurts. I know that in oak species, if you don't have a good rain by the middle of August, it'll just about doom your crop for that particular fall. So we'll have to wait and see how it's going. We've been out watering some of the younger trees to make sure that they are able to get their root system established and so on. But as far as being able to save the nut crop, those trees are a little too big for us to backpack water up a hill and put that where it belongs. But,
Wow.
the mature trees are usually pretty adapted. They will bounce back. And if we don't get seed to somebody in one particular year, those individuals go right to the front of the list for the following year. So typically we don't have 2 bad years in a row, knock on wood. So we'll make sure that if somebody has paid their dues as a member, we're going to make it right and make sure they get seed, if not that year, the next year.
I think a lot of these folks that pay dues for an organization like this are understanding of those bad years. I mean, that's why they're members is to support it and not complain when they don't get enough seed.
That's right. It sounds like y'all are it's a great mission you guys are on. So I'm looking at Mike. He's raising his hand over here. You got to go to the bathroom, Mac, or what?
No, I have a question for AJ. So, AJ, what time of year do these acorns drop, and when do you normally see the wildlife like deer, hit them? Are they on the ground as soon as they're on the ground, or the deer, scratch them out of the leaves, or is it something that they let them hang out for a little bit and then they'll find them later into winter?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's going to depend a little bit on where you are in latitude, but over here in the Ozarks, I generally see the seeds dropping, first part of September, middle September. And you're going to see a little bit of difference between the American chestnut, the Allegheny Chinquapin, and the Ozark Chinquapin. But interestingly enough, it's also different in the bloom time. We were talking about acorns and failure of a crop there. We get a lot of late season frosts and freezes that impact the blooms of the oak trees. We don't tend to get that with, nope. Pardon me, should have shut my phone.
Bobby's phone ring is a bobwhite quail. You must be a chicken owner.
Yeah, I've got my chickens in the pocket typically. Sorry about that.
No.
That's all good.
So yeah, these things don't bloom at the same time. They bloom in late May, early June, and that means they're not going to get hit with a frost or a late freeze as easily as some of the oaks will. So they're much more dependable, and as a consequence, they would have been much more reliable as a food source than oaks or even hickories would have been. Now, as far as when they start to drop their nuts, the animals are on them almost immediately. And even though they have spiny burrs that are very painful to get into, you wouldn't want to step on them. You don't want to grab them casually. They certainly hurt. But I have seen photographs of bears from field cams munching on green Chincopen burrs trying to get at the nuts. Squirrels will get in there. They will cut off the entire cluster of burrs, and they'll run off with them and try to chew into the burr and get into the nuts. And then, of course, once they hit the ground, mice, wood rats, squirrels, jays, crows, all kinds of critters are out in the woods going after this, and they figure out really fast that they taste good, and it's pretty popular. So that's what I see in terms of what's on the game cameras and what I see just on the trees that I tend.
So those things are dropping at a time of year when the browse has turned really woody, a lot of the weeds and things, it's really dry. So a lot of the foods that were there in probably in June and July are absent, and they does are lactating. They're fall. It's just a perfect time of year for something like that to drop from a wildlife standpoint.
Yeah, when they're dropping in that September, October time, that would be one of the first nuts they're able to start getting access to those amino acids and those fatty acids. It's going to be real crucial for them as they're getting ready for the winter season.
Yeah, again, that's when sawtooth oak drops. So hopefully we can replace sawtooths with the Ozark Chinquapin, a native mass crop.
I read where somebody said when they saw a Chincopen nut, that it made their mouth water and it made their hands sore.
Yeah. When we used to try to, when we clean the chestnuts, we have to put like two pair of leather gloves on. Sometimes we've, run over them in the truck to squish them out of the burrs. It's not fun at all. Not fun at all.
Yeah, nature protected those seeds very well.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating. That's a good question, Mike.
Good stuff.
What else you got, Dud?
Well, that's about as far as I can get here, unless you've got something you want to add. So how does somebody join? Do you have any of that information you can share with us?
You bet. If they Google Ozark Chinquapin Foundation, it's going to lead you right to our website. And on the homepage, you scroll to the bottom. You're going to pass a lot of our news and things that we've done recently. At the bottom is a membership opportunity, and you can pick whatever level of membership you want to deal with, or if you just want to do a donation. And I can assure you those funds go toward getting seeds, getting pollination taken care of, maintenance, and just like that tube donation you did, every little bit helps. I guarantee you those have gone toward protecting those seedlings from rodents and from a lot of damage that would otherwise happen from bears or bucks in particular. That kind of stuff, that's what we use the funding for, is to further more and more Chincopen growth so we can get the nuts out to people And the ultimate goal is down the road, maybe the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation isn't needed anymore because we've got this tree. We found those that are blight resistant, and we have them planted in such a way that they're all over the place. And isn't that a nice dream to have, that they're out there for people and wildlife to observe and take advantage of? And it's not a forgotten tree anymore. To me, that would be the ultimate goal. That's success. And we're moving in that direction.
That's a cool story, bro.
Yeah, it is. So AJ.
Yeah.
Now pay attention. We always like to ask our guest a trivia question, and if you get it right, one of the people that has given us a review wins a fabulous prize. So all the pressure is on you to get this right. So Mac, tell him who he's playing for.
So, AJ, you're playing for Josh Griffin, 24, and the prize is a Stanley travel mug in Mossy Oak Country DNA.
Which,
Nice.
Lanny, you just
I've used one.
you were
It's great.
fondling that one a
Is
little
this the
while
one
ago.
you
You've got mail.
Yeah, I used slightly used. No big deal.
Slightly used. Okay. Well, the question is, AJ, and I hope you know the answer to this. It'd be kind of embarrassing if you didn't.
No pressure.
What?
Now look, you got to tell him he gets to phone a friend if he needs to.
Yeah, if you need to phone a friend, you can.
Yeah.
We want you to get this right.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you all the different genera of Fagaceae in the U.S., but that's a
of
little
course.
bit far-fetched.
I
So
mean, yeah.
what 3 genera from the family Fagaceae are east of the Mississippi River?
Fagus that's beech. Quercus, which is your oak. Castanea, which is your chestnuts. And I'm getting real short real fast there. But that's 3.
That's 3. That's it. You got it.
He nailed
Ding,
it.
ding, 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 ding.
He nailed it.
How about that?
But yeah, there's some oddballs out in California and out, Chrysalip, yeah.
Yeah, you would have stumped me
Cas-
if you went out west. I'm done. I'm toast.
Yeah, I'm a local too. I struggle with some of that stuff that I don't live around.
Well, guys, this is listening to this story about these trees going away and what these guys are doing to bring them back, and the fact that you can join AJ's organization, and it's just I think people ought to do this. And
No doubt, and it just raises awareness levels
Yeah.
of really what's going on. To think about the story of these trees and the blight and everything else, it makes you realize how things could get impacted. So,
so this would be really like you, Lanny, with young children.
yes.
You could get 4 or 5 of these nuts and plant them and tell them the story and
Yes.
watch these things grow and then go.
Well,
plant
we've
them somewhere.
planted a chestnut, a blight-resistant chestnut. We went through that, so I'd love to add some to my little orchard out there.
Yeah, a little
I
diversity.
still think I can make them grow in the river bottom.
I bet you probably. I won't bet against you on that. That's for
You
sure.
know, guys, my mom got let out of school back in the 1950s to see a deer track in a farm field.
That's right.
And in my area, we brought back deer and turkey and wood ducks and brought back our forest and brought back our game fish. That was the conservation story of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. This right here is our conservation story. This is what we get to bring back. This is what we get to work with. And to me, I feel like that's a conservation story in the waiting, and we're just paying it forward. Somebody did it for us, and we're taking advantage of all these resources that are back again. And I want to make sure that I do my part to make sure that Chincopens are back on the landscape and that people get to enjoy them, and it's not a forgotten species.
Me too. I'm joining today.
Yeah, join. Y'all get.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
serious.
we want to be we definitely want to be a big part of that, which
Yeah.
is really why we asked to have you on here. And gosh, this is one of my favorite.
I knew it would
episodes.
be.
Yeah. They did. So AJ, why don't you hang on, AJ? This will be a treat for you. Dudley, have you got an Ask Dudley?
I do.
So let's do that.
Okay, Mac, you want to read it?
Yeah, I got it. All right. So, hello. I've had success with tree tubes from native nurseries on a variety of trees. I'm curious if tree tubes are recommended for short leaf pines or pine species in general. Thanks. Warm regards, Gerald.
Yeah. So
Great
me and Gerald and I emailed back and forth on this. Actually, he's from Missouri, and he said short leaf. So that's an indigenous pine to like Arkansas and Missouri. We've planted loblolly all over the place.
Right.
So that's cool that he's planting the indigenous pine. So one of my buddies named Chris Seams, who helped us get in the tree tube game, has been involved with tree tubes for years. And in fact, he's, they started.
He's a tree tube guy.
Yeah, and he has studied and emailed and talked to people literally all over the world about tree tubes. Here in the States, we don't tube conifers, but in a lot of parts of Europe, they use tree tubes on conifers. They just use a much shorter tree tube. Pines and conifers in general, they like to branch out from the moment they come out of the ground and have wide branches from the base. I think that's called excurrent growth, where a lot of other trees have decurrent growth. So that's really your answer. If you're going to plant a whole lot, like plantation style, you probably just need to, not use tubes and plant them at a tighter spacing and cross your fingers. But if you're going to do a small area, you probably do want to try to protect them in some way, especially if you've got a lot of deer. Mm-hmm. In the wintertime, rabbits and things can chew the base. So what I've had some folks do on a smaller scale is they'll buy tree tubes and cut them in half or thirds and use that on conifers. So it really just depends on how many you're doing and what kind of population of seedling predators you have in your area.
There you go.
So that's it, Gerald. I hope that helps.
Good one. Pretty common question for us.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right. Mr. AJ, we
Thanks
really
for being
appreciate
here.
you
That's
being
awesome.
here. Yeah.
Thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to visit with you. You guys have been a treat, and I thank you for that.
Well, hats off to the MDC, hats
right.
off to the OCF, and hats off to AJ. We really,
you very
we really appreciate it.
No doubt about it. Everybody get out there and do something about this stuff.
Yeah, do something to help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to join and get some of your nuts and get those things in the ground in some key places. And everybody's kind of looking at that. Probably didn't sound the best way it could sound,
Nonetheless,
but I mean,
your intentions were pure.
that's right.
For once.
So, Mr. AJ, thank you so much. Hendershott, AJ Hendershott, and Dudley, the name of the organization, quickly.
The Ozark Chinquapin Foundation.
Cool. Look forward to seeing you down here with that atlatl too. That'll be awesome.
All right, so Lanny, I really think you ought to learn to throw one of those atlatls.
I'm in. Whatever. I'm gonna make one first.
We can practice back in the warehouse like we do with
used to.
archery
Have to
equipment.
move all the biologic seed out of the way.
Yeah.
That's what you need as another hobby.
No, for real.
Yeah. So, as long as your arms are, I would think you could rear
could
back
fling
and
one.
sling.
Need
No
one with
doubt.
one of those judo points on it. Let me throw it at you, see how bad it hurts.
Yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Not going to do that. So, what did we learn today? Dudley, you probably didn't learn anything, but Lanny and I sure did.
I learned, again, there's just so much more stuff out there that we don't know about, that we need to be curious about, and trying to bring things back.
Yeah, I mean, the history, history tells us a lot, and we need to pay attention to what's happened with these species, and help restore them as much as you can. He made a very good point about how we focused on whitetail on fauna, not flora. But like you, Bobby, I like to, when I'm in the woods, I wonder what it looked like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
I really do.
It's a shame that those trees are gone.
It's a shame that those trees are gone. That's
Yeah,
exactly right.
and
So we need to do
it's
what we
our
can.
fault. We bring in a lot of these non-natives, and that's why some of this stuff happens to begin with.
That's right. So we got to get out there and.
So there's like that
roll your
song,
scissors up
Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire. So there's been, like our kids have grown up with never experiencing roasting chestnuts. over
I've
fire.
never experienced roasted chestnuts.
Yeah, I've seen them in New York on the side of the street vendors, and
Right.
I think those nuts
Those are
come
European or Chinese.
From, yeah,
Yeah,
they're imported.
Yeah, but you're right. There's that old Christmas song that everybody knows, and nobody knows what it's referring to.
So we need to start
We need to start doing it.
roasting them on a fire, bring them back.
Let's
All
go.
right, Mac, you got anything? Did you learn anything?
I did. It's interesting to think that you can make a difference. And looking back at the conservation victories, and to be a part of that conservation victory down the road would be something to be cool to be a part of.
It sure would. And you and
Exactly
Wilkes
right.
ought to plant some of these trees for sure.
it.
We're all joining.
Yeah, yeah. So look, guys, Tuesday nights on the Outdoor Channel, don't forget to watch the Gamekeeper television show. Richie works really hard
Richie.
on that.
Give yourself a horn, Richie.
Yeah, so
I think he's tired of working on it.
he probably is. He's doing a great job. It's some interesting stuff. We've
Yeah, it is. It's great stuff.
Once again, we're kind of focused on helping people with turkeys. It seems to be like the first 4 or 5 shows. That's what they've been about this year.
You know
So
how it is.
we care about those turkeys.
I like
that's
your
for sure.
turkeys, that's right.
Yeah. So, anything else, Mac, Richie, Dud? You got anything?
No.
All right, Lanny. I'm
Awesome
looking
stuff.
at you. Look like you're hungry. You fixing to get out of
Always.
it? Yeah. Okay. Why don't you say goodbye, Dudley?
Goodbye, Dudley.
Get us out of here, Mac.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast. And be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy, Ronnie Cuz Strickland.